Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us today from wherever you are in the world. I'm Rosemary TG, Claris Community Manager, and joining me for today's Claris Community Live about building secure forms with Claris Studio is Angie Wong, also from the Claris team, helping with production, Steve Sikora and Eric Clark from Harmonic, and Liz Lucan from Independent Support Services. As we get started, please click on the three squares down in the lower right to take our opening poll. We'd just like to know a little bit about your experience to date with Claris Studio. And while you do that, I will let our three panelists introduce themselves, starting, I guess, with Steve.
All right. Hello. My name is Steve Sikora. I'm president and co-founder of Harmonic Data Associates, Claris Platinum partner since 2004.
So that was Steve, in case you forgot, who in 2004 founded Harmonic Data Associates with Matthew Monroe. I am Eric Clark. I am director of program here at Harmonic and do a decent amount of FileMaker development myself and coordination with our various dev teams.
And Liz, you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Lucan. I am the Director of Database Operations at Independent Support Services. We are a fiscal intermediary based in New York. I have had the pleasure of working with the Harmonic Data team for over 10 years now, developing our FileMaker database.
And just now to share people's experience so far with Claris Studio. So we have about 75 votes, and 15% have at least one Claris Studio view in production. 11% are testing currently. 14% tested more than 6 months ago, but have not reevaluated Claris Studio since the recent releases. 27% are considering it for a project, and 1/3 have not tested Studio at all. And then on our next question of, have you used an external identity provider for authentication with Claris Studio? Again, about 1/3 not using Claris Studio. 5% of those who responded are, and 60% are not. So I think this is still a very new topic and people are interested. So with that, thanks everyone for helping us know where you are in your Claris Studio experience. And now I will let Steve and Eric take away the presentation.
All right. Thanks so much, Rosemary. Okay. We've been doing this for a long time, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to one of my favorite clients, Independent Support Services. I'm sure a lot of you have the experience of a client that always seems to stretch the state of your art, and this for Harmonic is that client. Since 2012, we have developed and iterated a FileMaker-based system that the ISS users long ago named Harmonics. Now, Harmonics is used across ISS's enterprise to serve their customers, individuals with developmental disabilities located in the state of New York. New York offers a program for these individuals called Self-Direction. As a participant in the Self-Direction program, an individual is able to make their own path by living at home or in the community and receiving services and supports customized to their own needs and vision. This program is a win-win by being designed to cost the state less than institutionalized care while providing the individual a much more personalized and integrated experience. ISS serves as a leading fiscal intermediary for the Self-Direction program. In simple terms, being a fiscal intermediary means that ISS pays the expense on behalf of the program participant and then bills the payee. This could be Medicaid, the state of New York, or the managed care insurance program. After spending years facilitating his disabled son, Barry, through the healthcare system, Alan Kolchinsky founded ISS way back in 2003. And he eventually helped to develop the programs that in 2014 would become self-direction in the state of New York. Today, ISS is the leading New York fiscal intermediary dedicated solely to self-direction. And they serve over 2,000 participants in that program. Now, ISS has over 100 staff. Those staff are internal to their operations, and they interact with Harmonics primarily through FileMaker Pro. But they also have over 2,000 participants managing their budgets with the help of a custom web portal, and they have over 10,000 community members and support professionals that work with those participants via the same custom web portal. How did ISS get here? I want to take just a moment to provide a little bit more context because it's very relevant to why Claris Studio is such a compelling ad. This is a story of digital transformation. It iterates across more than a decade, and over that time frame, ISS experienced rapid growth while navigating significant changes in the technical, regulatory, and cultural framework of their industry. When I first met ISS in the fall of 2012, paper ruled the day. Most of the data was stored in giant binders, and they used a database known as Excel. Integrating FileMaker and leveraging tools to digitize and automate manual processes allowed ISS to rapidly expand to service the demand for that new self-direction program. From the very beginning, Harmonic was augmenting FileMaker by integrating complementary technologies. For example, Harmonic developed a custom PHP and MySQL-based solution for Medicaid billing. We added a cloud-based web portal where participants could receive budget summaries. Users could email and upload their expenses. Support staff could enter their timesheets electronically. Video-based e-learning was launched. Multi-factor authentication was added. QuickBooks needed to be rescued and was reintegrated. And self-service vendor onboarding was added, facilitating ACH payments at mass scale. It's been a busy decade. One thing, however, was missing: portal forms. An organization of this type and magnitude requires a very large amount of formal documentation. That documentation had evolved over a decade to become a wide variety of handwritten and PDF-based forms and other documents. These documents are sent to ISS via email, snail mail, and even hand delivery. All of these forms need to be created, maintained, and routed to the appropriate people. Then they needed to be acted upon and filed. So back in 2023, after much longing, detailed design phase for web-based forms was performed. The project was mapped out. Unfortunately, tyranny of the urgent, remember that QuickBooks crisis, prevailed and other projects took precedence. What we didn't get done was deliver portal forms. Now, when Claris first previewed Studio a few years ago, I was intrigued. I didn't really understand the vision. Then they presented this graphic. Yes, I thought, that's exactly right. That is how Harmonic thinks and builds many of our systems. FileMaker for internal users, web technologies for external users in the thousands, and integration technologies for other systems. We signed right up. We had one of the earliest Studio team IDs, and we were excited about the possibilities. Alas, it wasn't to be. As Studio forms were for anonymous users only, and that use case just didn't fit any of our primary customers, especially not ISS. ISS has a wide variety of regulatory and compliance obligations that make anonymous data entry a non-starter for us. Q Engage 2025. At that developer conference this year, Claris introduced a number of new features, either recently deployed or coming soon to Claris Studio. Most importantly, support for single sign-on using an external identity provider. Bingo. Claris Studio would work. This is how we do portal forms. I made that pitch at our very next meeting to ISS, and we got to work. So why is Claris Studio the right solution for ISS portal forms and potentially the right solution for your customer or your organization? From my seat, it's a few things. Claris Studio is a modern platform designed from the ground up to support thousands of users via the web. It gives us the ability to quickly and easily build sophisticated forms and interactions. As discussed, we have a lot of competence building custom web solutions internally here at Harmonic. But that's an expensive process and it takes a long time. Claris Studio lets us do it quickly and gives us multiple responsive view types and an ever increasing feature list. It increases all the time. And of course, this all works off of native tables. And now with FileMaker 2025, synchronized data sources between Claris Studio and FileMaker. And last but not least, an initial amount of views are included with your FileMaker license. No separate purchase. Details just coming out. Altogether, this makes Claris Studio the perfect platform for ISS Portal Forms project. And I want to show you our pilot episode. As a participant in the self-direction program, we have Owen. Owen has the luxury and the responsibility of hiring his own support staff. Owen works with his mother, Maxine, to help manage those supports and services. And prior to Portal Forms, Maxine had to email or call ISS whenever she wanted a change in staffing. Let's see how this works now. Owen has decided he wants to improve his musical skills. He's always been fascinated by the pipe organ. And it just so happens that a rather famous organist works at a church just down the road and has agreed to provide lessons to Owen. Maxine needs to alert ISS's People Services team to start the onboarding process, and she's excited to use the new portal forms for the first time. So she logs into the portal with their usual username and password. Now, our ISS portal supports multi-factor authentication, so she's going to choose to receive a text message, and she'll type in that 6-digit code. Now, once Maxine is logged into the portal, it looks mostly as it looked before, but she has a new widget here. It's a forms widget, and on that widget, she can see a link to the hiring forms. So she clicks it, and since this is her first time, we give her an OAuth grant request, telling her how we're going to use that information. So she clicks authorize, and she is now brought into the Claris Studio portal form, where she starts to provide the information necessary. So her participant's name, Owen Ellis, the email that ISS can respond to her with, some additional questions. This person's never been employed by ISS, his name, Johann Bach, phone number, email address, organfantastic.org, won't drive, not a family member, not currently employed. It's going to be special comp, very special, $35 an hour, organ lessons, and next. And so she can verify the information, make sure it all looks correct, type in her name, sign the form, and she's done. Click the submit button. Isn't that great? Claris Studio forms work really well. They look good. That's simple as that. So now she can go to her email. And what she will find in her email is that we've used Claris Connect to, via Amazon SES, send her an email message. She can click a link in that message and it will take her back to the information that she submitted to ISS so that she can make sure she has confidence that she submitted it correctly and she can see that information. So that's what it looks like from Maxine's side when she fills out that form. What does it look like from the ISS side? So the staff at ISS that would receive this form is called People Services. People Services does the onboarding. So they're going to get an email address. They're going to click that link. And once they click that link, it is going to also authenticate them into Claris Studio, single sign-on. They're going to see the newest requests at the top. It turns out that in testing, Maxine has made this request multiple times, and we can find that by filtering for Maxine's name, for box name, etc. And so People Services can take this information and process it from there. Now, how do we make this work? Tell that story. I want to hand this over to Eric Clark.
Okay, great. First of all, we have to know who is filling out the form. Creating and managing tens of thousands of Claris IDs is just, from a management perspective, an impossibility. So we need to use an external identity provider. That's fairly straightforward enough. The default options in Studio are Amazon Cognito, Google Workspace, Microsoft Yantra, and Okta as imaged here from Claris's own documentation. Now, all of these cost money, and you have to already have your users set up on those providers. In our use case, it was prohibitively expensive to go this route with any of those providers, let alone the massive effort to associate these current portal accounts that already exist with new external identity provider accounts. So then we asked, what would it take to make it so that the ISS portal could act as an identity provider? To answer that, we first want to know and understand what OpenID Connect, or OIDC, is and how does it work. OIDC is an authentication protocol based on OAuth 2. It lets websites delegate authentication to a separate identity provider. If you've ever used the login with Google or login with Facebook option on a website, you've likely gone through an OIDC flow. Now, the flows goes through a series of back and forths with authentications, codes, and tokens, but results in a successful authenticated handshake. And because this is a standard that Claris uses to speak to external identity providers, anything that implements this flow can provide an SSO to Claris Studio. This is where Portal and Studio come together. The portal is built on a popular PHP framework called Laravel and uses an extension of Laravel's built-in authentication system. Luckily for us, all it takes to implement the OIDC protocol is 2 packages. The first is Laravel Passport, which is a package maintained by Laravel themselves that extends the native Laravel authentication system with OAuth 2. And the second is a package simply named OIDC Connect, and which implements the OIDC layer. And that is just a repo on GitHub, publicly available. So with those 2 packages installed, we entered the necessary client secrets and keys into Passport and into Studio, and we're ready to share ISS's portal's users with Claris Studio. The result of this is that all our users will see when they log in, see a list of forms that they have the ability to fill out. And if they click one, seamlessly and directly, at least from the perspective of the portal user, they will be able to access that form. Now, the users are happy because they don't have to jump through a bunch of hoops or memorize additional logins. ISS is happy because they won't have to deal with as many data entry headaches. And we're happy because everyone else is. Taking a quick break here. Rosemary, do we have any questions so far that we want to touch on?
No questions so far, but if anybody has any, please do drop them in chat right now.
Okay. We've got a few more conversation time slides coming forward.
I have a question for Liz. So Liz, what's the chance we could have convinced you to have everybody sign up and put all of their accounts in another external identity provider?
Probably zero. Given our user base, the desire to have our portal be a one-stop shop has been a goal since the portal since 1.0 portal, since its inception. We support so many different people trying to do so many different things on our portal. To ask them to have to go someplace else and remember another password, you got to sign up for this, you got to do, it's a non-starter. It just would never have gotten past go. We would have had a nice conversation about it, but no.
Yeah, and I think that's really the case in so many instances, right? It's setting up your permissions and your identity providers corporately is a big lift for everyone. It's super important, and we put a lot of energy into it. But once you've got it right, it's pretty difficult to move to something else, right? And I think that's the story here, was our ability to leverage those more than 10,000 accounts that we already had set up on the portal and just use them to authenticate in a Claris Studio. Yeah, makes it a possibility to consider.
And it's a massive amount of support to do that, to keep just one place's users access, resetting accounts, setting up, ending, inactivating. Like for ISS admin staff, for my team, just keeping our system secure and not letting users endlessly live on, have to inactivate. You've got inactivation rules, and you've got like all of these things that you have to do just every day. The need to not have to add another system that you then have to maintain and interact with and provide support for is also a factor for us, for our ISS admin staff, time, money, effort, and so on. So not only for the ease and comfort of our users, but also for our own support reasons.
Yeah, totally agree. Rosemary, I was seeing some
Yes.
questions or comments flying by now that we kind of paused for a second, and the esteemed Stephen Blackwell was one of them, asking about Microsoft AD. Someone else asked about 365. Let me comment on that. We absolutely use Microsoft Active Directory as our external authentication source for ISS's FileMaker system internally for those admin users. So if the users that we were trying to support were simply the internal users, that'd absolutely be the right choice. For Harmonic, we use Microsoft 365 AD connected to Claris Studio. So when I have my team members log in to fill out a survey or a form and I want to capture who did it, we SSO authenticate them into Claris Studio using our Microsoft 365 credentials. That is also how we log into our Macs. Actually, we use MDM hooked up to those same credentials. It's how we log into our Outlook. So I think the real story here is you've got to understand who is the user base we're trying to target, and then we need to connect Studio to that external identity provider. And in ISS's case, the predominant user base that we're trying to target is those more than 10,000 outside users. And those users live in our portal identity provider, which is Laravel Passports. That's why we made that connection there. But really, there's a lot of possibilities, right? If we can get OIDC hooked up or SAML hooked up, we can make that connection and we can make it work. And I think it's really powerful when you do.
Yeah, so I just want to be clear. So you're actually using to that Claris Studio workspace several different external authentication methods to serve the various audiences, the internal users, the Harmonic staff, and the external clients.
Good question. So from a technical standpoint, you can set up one external identity provider with Claris Studio right now. So if you hook up one, you can't then hook it up to another one. So for ISS, Claris Studio is connected to their portal OIDC provider, which Eric had a couple slides with the portal and Laravel Passport. The way we support ISS's admin staff is they simply log in and we onboard them. We're actually going to show this in a second here. We onboard them as an SSO user so that we don't have to set them up as a Claris ID into the account. And then Liz can go in and she can assign them additional privileges. And I think that's probably a good entree into the next part of our presentation here, because it is a little bit noodly. If I have one external identity provider, how do I get a range of behaviors for, say, two different classes of users, my admin staff and my participants?
So there's a great queue up to user groups. So now that we have our users being created in Studio via OIDC, let's talk about how we can sort those users into groups. Of course, the groups just control who has access to what. Now, in ISS's case, we have two classes of SSO users. We have the general portal users, think just data entry here. And then we have the ISS admin staff, who are the consumers of that data. Now, here's the catch with external SSO users and Studio group inheritance. External SSO users inherit their group or groups on creation only. And OIDC cannot specify which group or groups to add a user to.
Feature request.
Yeah, feature request.
But not currently.
So the default groups or group to which SSO users are added is configured in Studio, as you can see in the screenshot. And all newly created users will get added to the groups that you select here. However, as I just mentioned, we have two classes of users. And so we need a way to further differentiate between these groups, which we will do manually. What we will do is add ISS admin staff users, who are the consumers of the data, into their department-specific groups manually. And we can do that by selecting the desired group in Studio and then clicking Manage Users, and then make whatever selections we want to make.
And that makes sense in ISS's case because we have a very finite number of admin staff we want to assign to groups with additional privileges. But we have a very large number of external users who we want to come in with a default base level of privileges that give them access to the forms to fill out, but that's all. And we can filter their views so that they can only see data that they provide and so forth. So our lowest common denominator is that minimum data entry group for our external users.
So if we look at ISS's Studio kind of hub landing page, I just want to talk through a little bit about how we organize this. So we've got the admin hub, and this is really the development space for creating new forms so people can build new forms before anyone has access to them. We've got this My Forms hub, which we've set up as the hub that these external users have access to. And so you can see on the permissions for that, the only groups that can get to this hub are that data entry group. And we've filtered it to, for every table that exists in this view, users can only see records that they created. That's how we've set this up here. So that's how we're controlling what portal users can see. They can only see things that they've created. But if I go down to, say, this People Services hub for the People Services department, I see that the People Services group is the only group that has access to this hub. And I'm not filtering any of the records here. They have full access to see everything, which makes sense because they should be able to see all of the data. One thing that's worth calling out is Claris Studio does not give us the degree of granular control over user access permissions that FileMaker does. And I don't really think it needs to or that it should. FileMaker and Studio are solving two different problems. So for instance, if we look at the Studio documentation, if you look at the functions, you can scroll through this list. I will tell you, there is no function in here for get account name or get account user group or anything like that, where you could start applying hide conditions or that type of stuff in your calculations in Studio. It's just, do they have access to the hub? And every person who can see that view sees and is able to do the same stuff. Just something to keep in mind as you're thinking through deployment considerations and how you organize things.
It's natural that Claris will continue to add features and additional levels of granularity to the permissions and the security over time. But I would say that from our read and from our setup, it is certainly adequate for this use case. We have enough necessary controls to be able to set and use data entry users and administrative staff, internal administrative staff, and filter those views differently and control who can see what.
Right.
We have those pieces today. So I think we're at another good pause point, Rosemary. Any kind of questions or comments to grab here before we talk about design considerations?
Yes, there are a few. A couple of people echoed your feature request for more than one IDP group.
Yep.
So there's that. There's a question from someone who's relatively new to Studio. And that's, where does Claris Studio reside relative to your on-site FileMaker server machine? Is it inside or outside the firewall? And how do you get all that configuration working so that Claris Studio and FileMaker can communicate?
That's a great question. Claris Studio itself lives in the ether. It lives in the cloud. Claris doesn't tell us exactly where because they probably don't know exactly where, right? It's microservices based, which means as people access it, those microservices get spun up in data centers around the world and exist as needed and then spin back down when they're no longer needed. Claris Studio itself is a cloud-based service where the burden is on Claris and indirectly Apple to do the DevOps, to do the security, to maintain it, to make sure that it stays up, etc. In ISS's case, they're a strong believer in on-premise data for their most sensitive and their deepest secrets. They have a lot of PHI, PII, etc. We bill Medicaid. There's a lot of teeth that come with that, a lot of responsibilities that come with that. So they have a large on-prem FileMaker solution, and it's going to stay that way. It lives in rural New York, and sometimes the internet goes out. Sometimes the power goes out. They just got a generator installed, so we're hoping for better days along those lines, right, Liz? But that system is built to service those internal users. So how do they work together? The answer is, if you want to have Claris Studio synchronized with FileMaker, whether that's FileMaker that's hosted in the cloud or FileMaker that's hosted on-prem, they're synchronizing through a service behind the scenes. And Claris Studio does need to have access via particular port and IP address to that FileMaker server. So you can stand that up and they can synchronize data back and forth, but they're synchronizing via a service that is fairly resilient to disconnects, right? It's not a service that if it can't talk live, it doesn't happen. It's fairly resilient to disconnects, and when it comes back online, it will synchronize the data back and forth. So there's a live table on the Claris Studio side that has its data, and there's live tables on the FileMaker side, and those are synchronized via a service. They're not talking live.
I will just drop into chat right now the help article that goes through the technical requirements to configure that. It kind of details what services need to be enabled on FileMaker server and what ports you need to have open to your on-prem FileMaker server.
Excellent. And as always, read and make your own decisions about how you're configuring it and what you want to put in the cloud and what you want to keep close and so forth. Anything else before we jump into design?
Yeah, there was one other question, and this is, I think, an interesting one. It's about cost. I don't know, Steve or Liz, which of you wants to take this one? Like, first of all, great solution. Kudos for that from this person. And then he's curious about what was the third-party licensing cost per user for the overall solution. So not development cost. And then when you're scaling up your forms, is the licensing costs per user reasonable or competitive?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to have a better answer to that one than Liz. The licensing costs really sit in three buckets. The first and the easiest bucket is your Claris cost. You are going to get access to Claris Studio for any number of external users based on the level of your license. And this stuff is just being released right now. And so the details are still scant. I have not read all of them. But what I can tell you is that if you go and look at Claris, you'll see a standard license and a max licensing tier. And at that max tier, which is slightly more expensive than your standard licensing tier, you get access to as many views as you want to create. In the standard tier, the basic FileMaker license, you get access for up to 10 public views. And so you can start, if you only need 10 public views, it never costs you anything else for Claris Studio from the Claris side of things, right? So on the Claris side, the cost is not per user, so we're not paying an additional cost per any of those thousands of users. The cost is at the licensing level, and it's to do with the number of views that you can publish. That's on the Claris side. Now, the second bucket of costs that I want to talk about is your identity provider. If you're using an external identity provider like Cognito, like Microsoft Intra, like Okta, there are different ways that those things can be purchased and licensed. And if you are already in an organization that, for instance, is using Okta because you're across multiple devices and multiple sites, you're already paying for that license within your organization. And so it's probably not an added cost there. In our instance, however, had we decided to push all of our users into, let's say, Microsoft AD, there would have been a per user incremental cost add. And that's, as we stated, that's one of the reasons that we didn't go in that direction. The other, frankly, larger reason being the effort to get 10,000 new users set up. So in our case, one of the reasons we chose the Laravel Passport OIDC Connect route is that is open source software that connects our Laravel Passport user base, which has MySQL on the back end. That's where those users are stored, and it connects it in a standards compliant way with OIDC. So in this particular case, and for similar solutions that you could construct with similar processes, there really is no per user cost, right? So we're not paying a licensing cost per user for that middle tier, that middle bucket. Really the final bucket, and I know that the question said, I don't care about this part, but the final bucket you certainly do need to consider is, what did ISS pay us to set this up? And the answer is they paid us a chunk of money, right? They paid us time and effort to take that existing user store and connect it to Claris Studio. But because we already had the user store in place, it wasn't that much time and money, and it was a one-time cost. And now ISS can add 100 users, 1,000 users, 10,000 users to Claris Studio, and there's no incremental per click additional cost. All right, let's jump into design, Eric.
Okay. Briefly on design. Let's take a look at some of the design choices or design hacks that we did to try to make Studio look as similar as possible to the ISS portal. On the left here, you'll see the mobile version of the ISS portal, and on the right, you see a form in Claris Studio. There's a lot of styling and formatting in Studio that we don't have to do, which is great. It just looks good out of the box. That also means that there's some fine detail control that we don't have, which is time-saving in some cases. So while Studio...
Because you can't do it.
Yeah, there you go. While Studio gives us a limited set of tools to affect the styling, we wanted to do what we could to make it feel like home. So we added a colored background in the header to match the brand colors and added ISS's logo. Now, for those attentive watchers, you will notice that the way we set the background to a custom color was by setting the background to an image of a yellow rectangle, because we do not have the option to set a color fill by a hex code.
Feature request.
Yeah, feature request. There we go. So, little hack there. And that's really the extent of the styling that we did. You can see in the screenshot that there's some justification options and that sort of thing, but really it's fairly limited, which means it just works. For instance, you can see where it says hiring form in, that's probably Helvetica, I'm gonna guess, with the drop shadow and the text is white. We didn't make those choices. Claris Studio did that for us, and if you change what the background color is, the text of that title is going to change from white to black with a white drop shadow. So Studio is doing some magical things for us to make it look as good as possible and make it as legible as possible, which is pretty nice. And with that, I think I'm gonna hand it back over to Steve.
Yeah, any further questions? We do have one more thing we want to show that I want to leave a few minutes for at the end, but we got a little space here that we could entertain further conversation.
Before I ask them, I'm just going to ask the audience, please fill out our closing survey. We just want to know if we have inspired you to start testing Claris Studio. Before you leave, if you do need to sign off a few minutes early. So first is a question for ISS, and that is, do you have plans or will you publish any wide open to the public forms that do not go through your portal for authentication?
At this time, no. Most of our stuff is done after someone has been onboarded into our portal. So at this moment, we have no plans to use our forms to the open public. Might change, but for now, no, not yet. We're still in the baby steps stage of all of this too. So we're working on forms that have been on paper or PDF for years and taken one step at a time. So.
And another question, and this, I don't know who the right person to answer is, and then for this solution, where is most of the workload happening? Is it in Claris Studio or is it in FileMaker Server?
Most of the work, do you think?
Where does the scale come from?
I see. Yeah, I think if I'm understanding the question properly, I would argue that the ability to scale is entirely in Claris Studio. So we don't have to do anything to allow that form to be answered by 100 people literally at the same time. Whereas if we were connecting a custom web form directly to FileMaker Server, we'd need to worry about how many listeners do we have? Are we getting data contention? Do we have record locks happening? With Claris Studio, the way it's designed, we really don't need to worry about. And so that workload is really happening on the Claris Studio side. And then, like I talked about, that data synchronization is happening behind the scenes with the service. So that keeps our FileMaker Server usage in check.
Right. I think that's it for question. And then just another question came in about public entering a form with this solution. And I think what I heard from Liz is, no, not right now.
Yeah, I think the way I hear it from Liz is I got 100 more important problems than that that need to be solved first.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to before you show your one more thing. There was also several requests for some technical documentation or a white paper. Is that something that's in your plan to release?
It is, and we have an additional survey we're going to ask people to fill out at the end where you can give us your information and we'll email you when it's done. And I'm asking you in that survey, hey, would this be useful to you? So you can express your preference there as well. All right, let's jump back to the slide deck here. Right now, where we're at with this, we're working hard to get ISS's servers up to FileMaker 2025. You can imagine that a solution of this magnitude, that's a non-trivial effort. We already have our development and staging stacks up to FileMaker Server 2025. We're working on getting production there as quickly as possible. And of course, AI is a compelling reason, but another very compelling reason for us is the ability to synchronize data, right? We want to do two things with that. One of the things is we want to enrich Claris Studio. We want to be able to take value list and validation details that are from our FileMaker solution and be able to enrich Claris Studio with that information. And we want to make it easier to get the data that's put into those forms back into Harmonics, right? Back into FileMaker. So we're really looking forward to that data synchronization process. The second thing we're doing right now is we're still continuing to evaluate the best way to do this. As Liz said, it's early days. We're taking baby steps. We've gone down a couple alleys and gotten mugged and didn't like how it turned out. And so we're still trying to figure out, like, what's the best form type? What's the best flow model with Claris Connect, et cetera? And that's an ongoing process. And something I want to call out about that, Claris Studio is rapidly evolving. Like every 2 weeks, there's new release notes of things that have been added, things that have been changed. This is a very rapid process. And accordingly, Claris needs to hear from us. They need our help. We need to be telling them, what are the use cases that you need? How is the current in-market shipping product not meeting your needs? And they've given us a really easy way to do that. If you're in Claris Studio and you click on your little user bubble in the upper right-hand corner, there's a feedback button right there, right? So you can click that feedback button and you can tell Claris Studio, or tell Claris what you need in Claris Studio, what's driving you insane, what would unlock your ability to really empower your users. So I implore everyone to do that. So we're incredibly excited to write this ISS Portal Forms story along with our customer independent support services. And frankly, we look forward to bringing the Claris community along for the ride. And that brings me to one more thing after this slide builds. We've been to several Claris Studio events this year, back at Engage, when FileMaker 2025 was released. And at each event, when discussing external identity providers and that new feature that was brought out, the question was asked by someone, what about FileMaker accounts? Why can't I authenticate into Claris Studio with my FileMaker accounts? And if you've got a FileMaker solution and you've got your users set up there, it makes sense, right? It seems logical that you would want to do that. So that got us to thinking, why couldn't we use some of the same concepts and techniques to build a service similar to what we did for ISS, but a service that turns your FileMaker accounts into an external identity provider for Claris Studio? And so we built that. What I'm about to show you is not a finished product or service, okay? This is a prototype, but it is functional and working. At this stage, we're looking for input on your interest, and we're also vetting our design methodology with outside parties, right? We're still going through the engineering hoops and so forth on this. If there's sufficient interest, we think this could be brought to market within this calendar year. So, what would that look like? Getting this up and running, frankly, would look very similar to setting up any other type of external identity provider with Claris Studio. So you would install the product or service. TBD steps on that. Like I said, this is a prototype. And most of the work, frankly, is you would need to identify which FileMaker file you wanted to treat as your user access control. And you'd need to verify or add some simple things to that. We need a user table. Most solutions of any scope have a user table where you have a username, an email address, and you would need to add a field where the Harmonic Studio Authenticator could write that grant acceptance back into your user table. You would need to have accounts set up for your users. You probably already have this in your user table, but those accounts would need to be set up. They could be local FileMaker accounts. They could also be external server accounts. That's like external identity provider inception here, but there's no reason that either would not work. And so you would need to have those accounts set up, and they would need to be able to write to that user table. They don't have to be able to create records. They don't have to be able to delete records, and they don't need full access, but they do need to be able to write to that user table. And they need to be able to write to that table with the FileMaker Data API, because frankly, that is how we can turn your FileMaker server user table into a Claris Studio external identity provider. Once you had that, we would need to set it up. What would that look like? Really, it would be a simple process of copying data back and forth between that Claris Studio external IDP setup screen and our hypothetical scene on the right here, FileMaker or Harmonic Studio Authenticator, right? So we'd copy some things back and forth. We would provide our FileMaker server and our Authenticator server URLs, and then we'd enter a handful of details about our FileMaker file. Once we did that, what would that look like? Fingers crossed here. What we see here is I got 4 users. And what we see here is I have a simple user table. This user table happens to be the context starter file. And I need to onboard a new user. We've hired Jacob recently to be a front-end developer. And so I'm going to go in here. This is a real simple solution. And I'm going to add a user account of Jay Wiley. I'm going to paste it so I don't mistype it here on the fly. I'm going to add an incredibly safe password that I can type, hopefully, on the fly. And I'm going to make sure to pick that access privilege. I'm going to add his name as well. Right? So, normal FileMaker user setup. Nothing out of the ordinary there. Now, Jacob is going to be told to go fill out a Claris Studio form. So Jacob's going to go to a URL, but instead of being brought to the Claris Studio authentication screen, Jacob's brought to our authentication screen, styled like this because it's my company. It would be styled differently if it were your company. And so I'm going to put in those same credentials that I just added, and I've already authenticated with FileMaker Server with that file behind the scenes. I've got this OAuth request, and I'm going to click Authorize. And because this is Jacob's first time accessing Claris Studio, Jacob is also asked to accept the Claris terms and conditions, and Jacob is brought to the hub that Jacob can see. Now, if we jump back to my other browser here and refresh, what we notice is that Jacob has been added as an SSO user, right? Jacob is now in this SSO user account. And if I jump to the hubs, the reason Jacob can see just this SSO view is because that's what I'm filtering my SSO users to, right? So that's the basic concept. And we would very much appreciate, let me get back to my slides here. We'd very much appreciate some feedback from the community. If you go to the survey link that either the one that Rosemary put in the chat, the same link here, the QR code, if you're watching this as a video later, we'd very much appreciate this survey link. Don't confuse, there's 2 surveys. There's Claris's survey, and this is my survey. We'd love it if you would fill out both, and that would help us understand what we should potentially do with this Harmonic Studio Authenticator idea. Rosemary, back to you.
Thank you. I think that is very cool and would be a good solution for, again, those places where you're already managing your users in FileMaker. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and just to share out the final poll question. which is, will you test Claris Studio for a future project? Most people said sometime this quarter. So I realized I forgot to update the question from when I first asked it in July. So everyone said in the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, or calendar Q4. So, and only 10% said they're not planning to test Claris Studio at all. So
Awesome.
Thank you for inspiring us. There have been a lot of thank yous dropped into chat. Also some great questions and feedback that Angie and I will take back to the Claris Studio team and also to our team because we are responsible for training and certification. There were definitely some questions about more detailed step-by-step instructions for getting set up with an external identity provider. And so thank you, Liz. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your expertise and experience today. And we hope to see you in 2 weeks, either for our community live about how Beverly Schools and suburban Boston is using FileMaker and AI to solve a lot of workflows, or at the same time, our intro to Claris Studio Explorer Lab that Angie will be hosting. So we have a lot going on in the coming weeks. So thank you all. And as Angie said, we'll share the links and the recording in Claris community later today or first thing tomorrow. Bye, everyone.